Hello, everyone. This is Mark Anthony, and there's the mic. Mark Anthony here. We are talking about ADHD. We've been with Dr. Collins a couple times now. We're doing a series on this. Why are we doing a series? Because it's important. There's so much misinformation out there on the internet. And sometimes it's not just misinformation, it's information that's out of context. As we know, we live in a world that's so out of context that we don't know which way to look, left or right, up or down, because we don't even know what's happening. But today we have Dr. Drew Collins here with us from proactivechoice.com. Proactivechoice.com. Here's the beautiful part. This doctor isn't one of these guys that's just trying to sell you something or a pill to patch. He's here to let's talk about the causes. Where did it come from? Where's the root? What's the underlining? How to deal with it, how to manage it, how to walk with this in life. A lot of us have this, but we do not know. We're just called the black sheep, or we're called, he overthinks. So today we're going to be talking about the truth about ADHD that no one is talking about. Let's get to the brass knuckles. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the book that came out this month on ADHD. This book right here. Oh, yeah. It's nationwide, and we'll
Yeah,
talk about that in just a moment. But let's talk again. Again, thank you so much for being on the show, Doctor. I appreciate it. You're amazing a person. I love what you do, helping people. And let's talk about the truth about ADHD that no one is talking about.
yeah. Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me back. We got talking off the camera, and
Yeah,
turns out we all know people intimately that are struggling with what society would it now putting in the box called ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and just continuing with what we had been talking about earlier. If some of your listeners are ongoing in this seminar, is that there's always been, as we talk about it, the artist's dilemma or the inconvenient genius or somebody in the village that saw the sunrise and the sunset and made poetry, and then all the other ones were chopping wood. So we don't think this is a brand new phenomenon, but there
right.
is a sociologic and demographic phenomenon that I wanted to touch on again. There's an explosion of what people call neurodivergence, and some people say, oh, it's more diagnosis, earlier diagnosis, getting down in the school sooner, recognizing things, recognizing girls have situations like this because normally they would just be quiet and play by themselves, and that they don't get picked up until social stresses or their premenstrual hormonal changes bring them out. But getting back to the social situation, Marcus, we've talked about it. A lot of families are stressed with the modern economic situation. They're also often two people trying to make a household run, sometimes one person on their own, and they get locked into a medical system that, as a naturopathic doctor, I've been peripheral to and even interacting with to the best of my ability. But as a cash doctor, cash practice, I can also often treat people for things that are not necessarily an ICD-10 diagnosis code. So we're going to talk for a minute about the big book called the DSM-5 that all diagnoses are based out of, and they're observational diagnoses. They get more and more elaborated as the years roll on. So DSM-1
Right.
all the way up to 5, and now we've got lists of diseases that are mood disorders, and our old friend ADHD is one of them. So big picture, Mark, we're going to talk about neurodiversity because that's a socially accepted word now. Neurodiversity and all the people we know and all the rainbow of people that are in our world. And what the people don't know is that one, they're here to stay and they're going to be part of our fabric, including our bosses and our innovators. But also, there's options, non-toxic options that may be falling off the table just because of the way healthcare is delivered now in the United States, anyway. So maybe just one more point, Mark, is neurodivergence, and we can come back to everybody knows people like this or ourselves. ADHD, autism, which is really exploding for some reason. It used to be 1 in 10,000, according to Dr. Ammon. when he started his practice 45 years ago. Now it's 1 in 30. Autistic spectrum, they call it spectrum disorder. There's also Tourette's, which is less common, but that's just inability to stop yourself from blurting out or swearing, whatever. Some form of epilepsy, and even strange things like not being able to walk correctly or even numbers mixing up. Everyone knows somebody who's dyslexic. So these are all individual diagnoses, and individually doctors or paraprofessionals attach that to your child. And if they get that association and that diagnosis before they're 12, then they can be labeled attention deficit hyperactive disorder or any number of these other neurodivergent diagnoses. So now the big thing that is another demographic and a sociologic phenomenon is there's a thing called adult hyperactive disorder. And so if you go to academia now and psychiatric profession, it's a increased dramatically to the people that are having these conversations about inability to stay on focus and that sort of thing. So what we've got is a tranche or a bucket of people that may have been diagnosed earlier as depression and or anxiety, and now they've got ADHD. And what the conventional doctors are saying is, don't miss the ADHD for adults or women because we never used to talk about that. But now we have a diagnosis criteria, which is observational again. And here is the medicine. So there's what you and I have talked about a little bit, and I'll elaborate on it. If you go to the DSM-5s and you go to a diagnosis number, and now your kid or your spouse or somebody's got these numbers describing them, then there's also an approved drug for that diagnosis. So those are what get paid for by the insurance companies if you
Right.
have that kind of treatment. So there's other treatments, and I'll talk about that in the end here because I'm excited about those.
Okay, so what I hear you also saying is that ADHD isn't just for, it's just not just a childhood condition.
Right. Well, I would say that it is genetic, and there's a thing called epigenetics, which is what you can do with it. So we used to
Yeah.
learn when I grew up when went to University of Oregon. They did molecular genetics, and they said, well, your genes can't change, and they hadn't done the Human Genome Project yet, I think. But now there's all sorts of things that can methylate the histone proteins and unwrap the DNA. You can
Right.
get in or get out of. There's all sorts of ways you can unwrap what you were given by your mommy and daddy. And that's the fun stuff they call epigenetics, what you do to it. So yes, there's genetics, and this is one of the things I want to talk about again, which I think I touched on last time, but this is super important, is that there's diagnostics that are based now on a cheek swab or a blood test. So it's a hard lab test, which gives us a view of what we never saw before, which is there's genetic markers that are mutated in 40 to 50% of the population. So everybody has some of these knockout genes they call SNPs, SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. In other words, everybody else is one way, you're the other way. And there's 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 of these places that if you can't get it right with your genetics, you end up with the symptoms that are called neurodivergence. So instead of it being neurodivergence, it's a shame to be you and your family has this shame about mental illness, or everyone's depressed in your family, or you're all Irish poets, or whatever it is. It is genetic, and it's genetic in a very findable place. And the breakthrough is that there's some simple methylation products and cofactors and stuff that'll not fix the gene, but help you not accumulate biochemical debris and then pathology later. So yes, fine diagnosis with observational medicine, which is the backbone of psychiatry, is observation and analysis and then categorizing people. But this is a lab test, some wet work, some actual data that you can get and then pin it down because a lot of these things are overlapped anyway. So it's not just like one gene is one diagnosis. It's like 5 genes has all these same anxieties, ADHD, depression, etc. And those happen to be called neurodivergence, and those happen to be treated with medicine, but also they happen to be the ones where there's a genetic marker. And there's also a treatment for those that are safe. You could even do it with the medicines if you wanted to, but it's a safe way to methylate and add these cofactors that are botched up in the person's biochemistry. So that's the big news. If you get nothing else out of the talk,
Mhm.
seek some genetic testing, which is not that invasive. You can do it with a cheek swab. A little kid can do it, 2 years old. And then there's natural solutions. So anyway,
And
um,
that's something that you're
neurodivergence.
offering at your office too, correct?
Absolutely. So call our office and we'll be happy to direct you. And it's exciting. I don't only do ADHD kids, but I do have patients like that. And over the 41 years of practice, we have a lot of kids coming and going. And now this whole thing with the adults, frankly, it's 30 somethings that got into studying with Provigil or Adderall in college. And now they've got a script because it's a controlled substance to get these amphetamine shaped drugs, and it goes with the diagnosis. So someone has to give them a medical diagnosis in their, college, and then they get to stay up all night, writing their term papers or whatever. And then it became kind of a cause celeb for people in the Silicon Valley and whatever, just burn code all night long. And these Provigil and Adderall, these stimulants were prescribed by doctors to say, oh, yeah, you have a disease. It's called adult hyperactive disorder. And getting back to why these work, the people who are unable to focus, they can
Right.
focus really well on one thing if that one thing is their true love. So we'll get into the esoteric of this real quick, but there's nothing wrong with these people. They just are not stimulated by half the stuff that we listen to or do. So the thing that you're watching them do for hours, whether it's take apart a toaster or write code or pet their ponies or whatever it is, that's self-stimulating and they're getting as much dopamine out of that one thing as we get out of watching TV or something.
Right.
So they run out of steam pretty quickly if it's not a dopamine releasing behavior. And when you give somebody a stimulant, which are very similar chemicals to the dopamine neurotransmitter in our brain, the reward neurotransmitter, when you give them a stimulant as a medicine, they get say, satisfied or gratified doing other tasks than just the one where they get the main line of dopamine. So they're more like us and they can sit and be happy doing things that we are, mildly miserable doing, but they couldn't stand it because they have to jump up and look out the window. So when people treat ADHD, they say it's a profound miracle. They can sit in their chair. They're not disrupting others. And by the way, that's usually how in the school system the rubber hits the road and they get uh, taken out and noticed and exiled out of the classroom because they're disrupting somebody else. So you can be all
Right.
scattered all over, but as long as you sit in your chair and don't touch anybody, they just keep grinding along. But what's going on is kids can't stop, no impulse control, right? Let alone if they're being violent, and that's even worse. But so they get ostracized and marginalized, and they get diagnosed. And then the diagnosis is usually they have ADHD of some form, comorbid, or at the same time as the same problem of anxiety or obsessive compulsive behavior, which is kind of all the same stuff. But each of those has a different number, and each of those may or may not have a different drug. So when you have adult attention disorder, hyperactive disorder, attention deficit, hyperactive disorder, they're now saying, oh, we missed you the first time around. You were just depressed and anxious, but you also have this too. So
Okay.
you need the three-way drugs. You need a nice SSRI, a nice serotonin juggler to make you feel a little satiated. Paxil, Prozac, Zoloft, that kind of thing. Um, um, and oh, by the way, you're also anxious. So that was depression. Here's anxious. Anxious has got a different drug, benzodiazepines, Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, all those kind of things. Oh, you're on those too? Well, we didn't know that you were ADHD as well because you still tap your foot when you're writing a school paper or you've got a list of things that and you're just overwhelmed. How about if we give you some Adderall? So all different drug categories, all different neurotransmitters they're working on, but that you can see how quickly a 35-year-old can get a little overwhelmed with all the meds they're on. And I've had a lot of patients like this where, I mean, sometimes they even have to take medicines for psychosis and they're starting to have suicidal ideation and you know, hallucinations and stuff like that. So no one wants anybody to be dangerous, jumping off a bridge or kill somebody, violent. So the psychiatrists have a burden of not undertreating, and they don't want to overtreat, but they do want to dampen the antisocial behavior. So by the time a parent comes to a pediatric psychiatrist, they realize that there's a crisis. The parents are sitting there going, "We don't know what to do. We love our kid, but we don't understand why he can't behave." And that's when they pat him on the shoulder and say, "Look, you've done a great job, parents, but this is a genetic thing, and your dad probably had it, and this is true. And we've got a really good profile on these medicines, and they're very safe." So that's the nature of the situation today.
What would you? Okay, that's really good, and I really like the way that you explain that, because you normally see what I hear you saying is you're not saying, you know what, just because you struggle with this doesn't mean that we can't help you. You're saying, you know what, let's just not just give them a pill and just walk away and say that's going to be okay.
You know what? I like giving pills. I like taking pills. I don't like taking pills that block physiology because
That's different,
there's always hell to pay. So there's ways to be indulgent. I mean, we always say this is kind of like a first world problem because if you just don't have any food, then you don't have the luxury of wondering if the pill is holistic or not. But getting back to the diagnosis in the United States of ADHD kind of exploding in the school systems, for the 6-year-old to 14-year-old kids, and then this added bonus of, oh, women are being diagnosed later in their lives and men, and they're all be calling it ADHD. But they they want to not feel like they can't get something done, but the dirty little secret is they kind of like their manic times. So we've heard of bipolar, right? So that's two poles, manic, depressive. And a lot of times we like to be around people when they're manic because they're creative and fun and party and some of the best salesmen in the office and or the artist that's unveiling their beautiful work. But we don't like that bottom part, that depressing part. So when you're talking to a very creative person, a lot of times they struggle and they're not loving life as much as other people are. They have these highs and lows, crushing highs and lows. We talked about Robin Williams before off the mic, and these people bring in a lot of beauty and creativity and that sort of thing. But they often are miserable. And they feel bad in their skin too. So if they can get on a med program. Sometimes it helps. It's kind of mostly flat affect. I mean, they're not thriving, but sometimes it keeps them from being suicidal. Now, you can overlap, you can taper people, you can give them different programs. I guess that what people aren't being told is that there's strong enough programs to not have to take the medicine most of the time. Whereas it's the other way around in most people's experiences, they're told that there's nothing else they can do.
right?
These medicines are safe when given correctly, and that everyone's doing it. And don't you want your kid to do good on the SAT tests or the, whatever the upcoming LSATs or whatever? And there's a lot of pressure to perform academically. And if the parents were told by their professional, this is safe, everybody does it. Here's the diagnosis code. We figured that out, and it's paid by insurance. Let's try it. And doggone it, the kid just sits in the chair and studies like nobody's business. And yet the question is, what was wrong in the first place? Was there something wrong in the first place? Are they just in the wrong learning system? Do we have the indulgence that everybody gets their own special team of scribes to walk around with them? Or is it somewhere in between? Whereas, okay, special circumstances for certain people, but everybody else has to just sink or swim. So this is the thing where everybody gets a trophy or whatever. So um, the problem for the teachers is that they don't want to diagnose and they just want to keep moving down the road. So they got 25 kids in a classroom. Two or three of them are causing trouble. Boom, outside down to the principal, and they get to talk to the school counselor if they're on campus, or a school nurse or somebody, or the parents get a call, right? And no one wants to have that call, and they sort of don't want to be told their kid's instigating something. So anyway, the parents want answers, whether they're adult hyperactive people who are recently looking for something. The huge amount of information out there medically is that the medicine is a big success since the 1990s. A study was done. It's one of the best drug success stories of all drugs all throughout all time. However, the question is are they making the kid healthier, the person healthier? So there's two things. One of them is there a phenomenon? Yes. The other thing is it being successfully dealt with and integrated in our society? And the answer is no, it's not. It's just being bumbled. And still, what's unique about these people, which is about 40% of the population, by the way, what's unique about these people is that they're going to be older no matter what. They're going to be 35 running the Safeway manager position, right? They're going to be your boss in the coding facility or whatever, server farm manager. And these exact talents may be serving them. Might be walking down a hallway and looking at numbers and doing stuff with a laser, but they don't do well with others. So they're going to have jobs, they're going to be successful. And even the people who are nonverbal, like there's a whole category of autistic spectrum people who literally need to have somebody with them at all times. They just would die if someone wasn't putting food in their mouth. And yet, turns out there's this whole phenomenon that these different people all over the world, they call nonverbal, there's category of this autistic spectrum, nonverbal, they're telepathic and they're talking to each other and they've never met. So there's something about these special features that are in a portion of us, or maybe just discovered in a portion of us, that my real hope is that we can get a dialogue going. Because what happens is you get a town hall type thing, and then there's parents who are angry because the insurance won't cover something else. Or the parents are exhausted because they don't have anybody that will babysit their kid because they're such a handful. Or the parents are they themselves have some questions about why they've always been that way. And there's not a lot of, well, we tried recently, but there's not a lot of conversation about how to make everybody lower the heat a little bit about pointing fingers and saying that kid's disrupted to the school, and maybe thinking the school's system of learning is a little bit off. It's hard to get kids to sit for 12 hours. But the thing I want to remind everybody of is that there's always going to be special people. We need to integrate them as much as possible into our community and share the burden a little bit, putting up with some unusual types. And I know that's hard for people. And and yet we also can ask questions of the medical system, because right now they're kind of stuck with behavioral cognitive therapy and then the stimulants. And then as far as the other medicines, they keep going back to comorbidity of anxiety medicines and or depression medicines. So we're back to the, good old fashioned SSRIs or benzodiazepines or some other form of psychiatric medicine, which I don't think is necessary for very, very many of these people. I don't think it gets them.
I agree with you 100%. The only thing that I feel like that's not being talked enough about, though, is the good stuff that comes out of this. We could talk about, okay, this is what's happening and it's being misnoticed, and they're giving different names for it that makes that person look bad, feel bad. Nobody
Yeah,
talks too much
you
about
mean
that.
you mean the qualities of these of our neighbors, the qualities of these spectrum
Yes.
people, what they do. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
So
Look at Elon Musk. I mean, look
yes,
at geniuses
yes,
like that. Look at Picasso. And if you look at all of these people that are out of the box, right?
right.
That's considered abnormal. Something's wrong with them, but they change the world. But the ones that are abnormal, let's just say the ones that are just normal, okay, we'll call it normal since that's the word. It seems like it's okay to be normal. I'll be honest with you. That's, to me, is called the status quo. So somebody that's more ADHD would not be in the status quo box. Am I correct, or am I missing the mark here?
Yeah, status quo. So when you're
Think differently.
when you think differently, sometimes you're the quietest kid in the room. You may not be doing any bothersome behavior, you're just like quietly in your head and hoping that this terrible feeling will all go away. So there's uh, each person grows up in an environment that they have to survive, whatever it is, and it starts with basic safety stuff. And we've kind of go over some of this also. And our role as adults or as community members is to make sure the children are safe and they get some basic training in sociology and how to get along with others. So let's say that um, kids are kids, and all of a sudden someone can't help themselves. And that's again where it starts getting diagnosed. It's not just being a frisky kid or hyper because you're, high on sugar or something for a day. It's these diagnoses happen in multiple settings and the person cannot stop it. So not just at school, but at church, in the safe way, in their birthday party, in the middle of the night, they cannot stop themselves. Okay. It is an accumulation of stuff, in my opinion, biochemically, but it also points to addictive behavior and that kind of stuff. So at the tail end of this, I want to tap back into addiction as well as the whole mood disorder thing. So special people come out of uh, incredible challenges as a child. So usually when you go back and look at somebody very interesting, they always say, "Oh, I was picked on," or "I was the runt," or "I was, the smartest kid, but no one liked me," or "I was the band kid," or you know, we all don't want to be that kid, or we might have been that kid, but we certainly have seen that sometimes the cruelest pack mob mentality is directed towards the other, right? The scapegoat. And it's an ancient thing of just pointing, that's the weirdo, that one over there. And everyone decides, yep, everybody with green hair is no good. So that's a real burden to handle through grade school and childhood, and these diagnoses have kind of always been hung on people. It's quite a thing now though, and with the academic system kind of challenged by uh, defunding, and all the enrichment programs are being cut out, and things like art and exercise and that kind of things are often not the core. The very things that keep these people on the straight and narrow, like frequent breaks and getting up and doing things with their hands and different learning styles, those are being streamlined, right? Everyone's got a Chrome book, and they, talk to the answers that they're supposed to be generating. It's sad. So we saw a real divot with the COVID isolation of kids, and they are having trouble identifying facial structures and nonverbal cues and stuff. But add on top of that, if they've got this burgeoning feeling like they can't stand anything that doesn't interest them and they just cannot hold their attention, those are being diagnosed as ADHD. And now adults are going, me too. I can't listen to three things in a row. And these people are often going to come up with something great, something fantastic, something magical, something artistic, something outside of the box. But they may be tortured, they may be miserable themselves. That's the problem. And sometimes they're on meds. And, sometimes that meds has been so much part of their personality for so long that they don't know who they are without it, and they don't dare go off it because then they have a complete destruction of their ego state. So it's not simple to take people off medicine once they're on psychiatric medicine, but usually the ones that we're talking about for ADHD in kids are mostly stimulant type medicines, and they often cycle them off of it during summer because they feel like they're not going to grow as much if they're on them. So, in this narrow category of pediatric medicine, in this broader category of mood disorders, and what's out there, I'm, just a doctor that sees a lot of different kind of people. What's out there is a blooming diagnostic category. So there's more and more subcategories of numbers with a point something something delineator at the end of it. And that means more books, and people have to go do the insurance coding again and get another 2026 manual and everything software. So it's not getting more understood, is my perspective of that. It's not getting more understood. It's just getting more described
Okay.
and
Are we seeing
overlap.
this more in women or more in adult women, adult men, or is this
Yes, yes, yes. And someone's saying, well, why is that? Is there more? Or are they just identifying it now because of these books where you have a delineator. Here's anxiety disorder, and here's compulsive neurosis, and here's suicidal ideation. Oh, and here's another one where they're inattentive and unable to control their movements. Oh, that's a whole other group. And I noticed that was in that lady who was also depressed. So the doctor has to write on their notes, they have to write a number. And that, oh, that lady gets another number. And now she has another number. And she's not only depressed, but she's anxious and she's got ADHD, adult hyperactive disorder. And each one of those diagnosis codes could be given a different drug by completely legal, standard of care. So yes, there's more diagnoses of adults, and yes, there's more adult women being diagnosed. It's kind of new, and that is thought of because in general, women are underrepresented in the literature, and most doctors think in terms of pathology relative to what men get, and then they kind of make it fit to a woman unless it's a solely female practice. But when it comes to psychiatric medicine, a lot of the studies aren't including enough women, and so they don't have that information. And definitely with kids, there's more girls, young girls being diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or anxiety, even stuff like that, because younger girls are sort of sociologically allowed to be by themselves and be quiet and be focused, play with their dolls and all that kind of stuff and light them all up. But they say that it's not until the stressors of middle school or pre-pubescence forces them into certain emotional challenges that they start having symptoms. They get squirrely all of a sudden. So that would be in a diagnosis of somebody that wouldn't be thought of 40 years ago as hyperactive disorder. They didn't even really use those words, but yeah, there's more girl kids being diagnosed, and there's more adult women being diagnosed, and there's more adults being diagnosed. And that's because of doctors being allowed to have a diagnosis code that fits an adult. And now they can type it in. And then that means that they can prescribe the medicine or not that goes with that code. And if you only have the other code, like if you only have anxiety, then you can't prescribe a stimulant, right? So you have to have the diagnosis code that's got the drug for you to prescribe that drug and hopefully help somebody. So it's
Well, what's
polypharmacy.
the positive and the negative? I mean, let's say you prescribe a drug to help them out with that. It helps them out for a while, but what if they start taking it? Are there any repercussions?
Right. So these are often very specific molecules that are shaped like our own chemistry. And when you um, take anything from outside to you, and the more concentrated it is, and the more it's shaped like some of your own molecules, there's a possibility that your body can get dependent on taking the stuff from outside and then shutting down all the factories of your own inside. So when you're talking about neurochemicals, the big ones are what they call monoamines. And so monoamines are dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And those things are firing back and forth, kind of free prefrontal cortex, get it going, prime directive where you're thinking and you're focusing and you're getting stuff done with your fingertips and whatever. Those are also highly associated with reward. So people talk about dopamine and getting a dopamine rush, getting a dopamine hit. And the people who are ADHD don't get that same dopamine hit. And so the drug is shaped like dopamine. And when you say what could possibly go wrong with that? Well, it's okay, I guess. And that's why they say, you know what, it's really been helpful over the last 50 or 60 years to give people things that are like what they don't have enough of. That's the idea of that drug. And then there's some other drugs that are more like pushing the other button of anti-anxiety. And then there's some other drugs that are pushing the neurotransmitter serotonin for less depression. And they sort of go back and forth based on the conventional wisdom of what you do for that set of problems. And I don't know if you know too many people who are on meds or mood elevators or uppers or downers, but they don't thrive. They're maybe socially not aberrant and they can grind through their day, but they're not happy. They're grinding, they're just grinding. Unless they're on the stimulant package and then they're manic. And manic's not the same as happiness. It's just completely wired. And we've heard of people on speed or speeding up, speeding, and that's what it is. It's the monoamines are basically the same chemical as amphetamine. If you give amphetamine to a 6-year-old, amphetamine to a 12-year-old, there's a black box warning on it. You got to be very careful about it. And to the credit of the doctors that do it, they're very careful. They want to do it the right kilograms per milligram and get the right dose and then take them off in the summer and that kind of stuff. No one does it carelessly. And it can make the parents happy and the kid focused. But what's wrong, Mark, is that your own receptors for those neurochemicals fade away. If you've got a real strong input of one neurotransmitter, then the receptors go away. It's sort of like you're always chasing the catcher's mitt. He keeps throwing more and more balls out in the field, and then they start taking away the outfielders because they don't need them. You can just have one guy there. So the receptors go away, and that's kind of an addiction waiting to happen. So the person that does not feel that good feeling, whether it's from their own body making dopamine or the med that's like dopamine, when the receptors go away, it's just like you took it away. So that's what happens when someone's an addict. So when someone's an addict, and it can be a heroin addict, or it can be a methamphetamine addict, or it can be a fentanyl addict, or all those people, their receptor sites are gone. And so no matter how much they get, it's not making them feel normal. And in the case of dopamine, that's kind of like a set up for addictive behavior, like binging on buying stuff on at QVC. You get this rush when you buy something and then it goes away. And they talk about that being a little dopamine hit, stimulating yourself. And a lot of people who have addictions that are even exercise can be an addiction because they need that endorphin release. So they're low on that neurotransmitter. So what's wrong with taking medicine is not everything's bad with taking medicine short term or even life saving, but it's not working with the body. It's kind of trying to patch the dam a little bit. And holistically, what's wrong with these people, in my opinion, is they need to be supplemented with some of these methylated products, whatever, and then they need to have a supportive school system, or at least a supportive community where they can find a niche where they're good at what they're good at. And they may not know what they're good at because they've always been failing at the other system. We had a slide in our slideshow where it was a guy interviewing a horse and a monkey and a fish, and they said, okay, you're going to have to do this fitness test and climb that tree. Well, the same test applying to all these different learning styles doesn't work because some people are just stuck and they don't know how to move forward in these abstract thoughts, or they need to build a sandcastle or something with their hands. So the medicine is problematic in that it's not curing anything. It's not fixing anything. It's making it more socially acceptable, and it's even maybe taking away a little bit of their magic personality. So I talked about this gal that's here in town, that medical doctor, and she describes herself as an under-medicated ADHD adult. Her colleagues tell her, you really got to get on meds because you're just going a million miles an hour. And she says, I like that. That's my superpower. I like being able to have 3 businesses and run a whole practice and da da da. And she did go on the medicine earlier in her life and hated it. It made her dull, right? So what's wrong with the medicine? It's not matching the unique life of that person. It might be a temporary stopgap that gets them so they don't feel like they're discombobulated or losing it or can't get through their
I hear what you're
yeah,
saying, but who says that? I mean, let's just back up a little bit. I mean, let's just I guess I'm sticking up for the ones that are struggling with that. So
yeah,
let's just say they do struggle, and she said she did take it, and she said it noticed it took her spark away and her
yeah.
creativity, or it just slowed her down. I mean, who says that? What is normal? Like like I'm just saying, yeah, okay, maybe you've got 100 people in a room that are really just melancholy, and then you've got out of the 100, you got 4 people that aren't, and they have ADHD. I'm just saying, like, are you seeing where I'm coming from?
Yes, the answer is the school system slash homeschool slash Department of Education slash the church slash your parents. Everybody else gets an opinion about who's Johnny and what they're turning into. And the more extended family you have, the more grandma, that kid's funny looking or whatever. It used to be we took care of our own, right? And now mom and
Takes a
dad got to go
village.
to work. It used to be just tie the kid to the ox in the back and you just keep plowing. It's now we drop them off and all of our kids are raised by the same teachers who kind of chop them through and give them their grades and everything. And that's the part that's a disconnect with the parents because they have no real connection to the kid because they're away from them all day long. And that's again the culture, and people aren't living home with a rural-based economy and around large animals that have a beginning of the day and an end of the day. So, who says what's wrong with a kid is the very people who need those kids to become productive members of society.
Correct.
Who says what society is should be the elders of our community? And now it's not that. It's more like TikTok or influencers or, you know, a whole different sort of internet friend that is more in their head than the parents or the friends or even their.
Talk about that. You've got that book right next to you.
Okay,
And,
so I
I
bought,
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
National Geographic has a special edition. I guess they just took it off the shelf in March. But the whole thing is on ADHD. It's called The Science and What It Tells Us. And spoiler alert, there's about 10 different little articles in there, beautiful photos and everything, which all the things you're saying about are addressed in there, but not to my satisfaction. What they're really saying is there's a phenomenon. They're discovering girls have it more than they thought. They're discovering adults have it more than they thought. And the answers, according to the experts, are early diagnosis and basically polypharmacy. Treat the anxiety first, treat the depression first, and then treat the ADHD if that's still raising its ugly head, and test early. And that's the problem is that the testing right now is not biological or laboratory diagnostic. It's just discursive analysis and psychiatric analysis based on these DSM-5 criteria, which are endlessly more elaborate and outlined and indexed and that sort of thing. So there's overlap on all these symptoms, and you can't just say that's a blue tiger and that's a red rhinoceros. It's their red rhinoceroses, and they are coming at you with all sorts of extra problems. Besides, mommy and daddy might be divorced, or they might be a fourth kid that gets kicked on the way to school, or they have two learning disabilities at the same time, or whatever. They might be iron deficient anemia. So it's rough being a kid, and it's rough being a kid in a system where um, maybe the budget is stressed and they're cutting back on stuff, or their kids aren't getting their first or their only meal at school. That's getting cut. So macronutrition is still one of the big problems with childhood hunger. But getting back to these special kids, there's always going to be special kids. They're often the ones that bring new ideas in. Sometimes they're a pain in the ass, and they really beat up on the parents who often get divorced about this, or they are ashamed about it, or they, don't have anyone to turn to unless it's the medical professionals. So this is a good thing for counseling and family of origin work and all that kind of stuff. But I do say we can take the edge off it. Getting back to what I do, getting some of these major irritations off of this person's already burdened genome, and one of them is food allergy. Stuff like basic stuff like corn. Everyone's heard about gluten, that kind of thing. And the next thing is genetic testing, finding out if we have to methylate, and then a lot of these symptoms go away. They can sit in the chair, and they can still be athletic and artistic and creative and all that kind of stuff. It's just when they can't stop themselves. That's the part that really demands intervention. They can't stop themselves from movement. No matter what time of the day and night, they can't stop themselves from thinking so many scattered thoughts. They can't get one done, and that there's ways to focus that. So that's the kind of stuff that we do with our counseling with the patients and the kids. But we're not opposed to people getting diagnostically worked up or pediatric counseling. I think that's awesome. Depends on how long and deep the parents can go with that kind of thing. Again, it's expensive, you know. Insurance will probably cover some of that, but with insurance comes this same kind of system. So you're not going to get any too many outside the box ideas if it's somebody that is working on a fairly high volume of kids. There's certain things they're kind of allowed to talk about. They may not spend a lot of time saying how wonderful this kid's going to be down the line as the next Elon Musk. It's more about getting the diagnosis and then kind of guiding the parents into the choice of the medicine. That is kind of what you're going to get.
You know,
Doesn't mean if you don't go, doesn't mean if you go to a pediatric counselor or a psychotherapist that you're going to get meds. Usually that's the purveyance of the MD or DO. Usually a psychologist or a counselor, they don't prescribe meds. And they'll have all sorts of different interesting things, cognitive behavioral therapy and that sort of thing. There's even trans electrical stimulation, different pads you can put on your head and send currents back and forth. So there's a lot of off the pharmaca options, but that doesn't seem to be the first line for parents. They get Ritalin or Adderall first because it's cheap, pretty much. And it
wow.
works. I mean, the kid gets lined up real quick, and the parents are like, yeah, that's great. They're quiet now.
So there's about 40% of the population that basically have it, you're saying.
Yeah, so and these are tests that are just available now, Mark, and I'm excited about everybody finding out. We can tell you how to get them if you want. And again, either a cheek swab, like a little kid, you can do it. You doesn't have to take their blood. And let's say you find out you're 6 out of the 8 these genetic markers have been mutated, and you're not going to be able to methylate your homocysteine or your folic acid, all these kind of things that guess what? The symptoms of that problem are exactly what the symptoms of neurodivergence are. The inattentive behavior and bipolar disorder, manic depressive, autistic spectrum even, and suicidal ideation and chronic depression. All those mood disorders happen to be tracked almost exactly with these genetic markers. So let's say you've diagnosed that and you go, okay, now what do we do? Well, you can still try these medicines, but guess what? Some of these genetic markers have to do with not being able to break down the very chemical that you're going to give them as a drug. So we don't know that about most kids. Some kids cannot take this stuff. The minute they take a med, they feel terrible. They feel really terrible. And it's a big disaster. They got to stop it. And turns out you can predict that because that very kid can't break down. They don't have the enzyme. They don't have the gene to make the enzyme, which is a protein, which breaks down the neurotransmitter like epinephrine, or which we also know as adrenaline. So if you squirt out adrenaline, and unlike your friend, you can't dissolve it after about 10 minutes, you're still on pedal to the metal, high alert aggressivity, and it does not go away because that chemical doesn't break down because you don't have the genetic ability to make the enzyme that breaks it down. You're like that your whole life unless you figure out how to somehow mop up that neurotransmitters. There's ways to do it, but those are the kids that end up in juvenile detention and they get an early criminal record. They're, bad apples. So they're they're genetically set up for failure in our system, but no one wants anybody to be aggressively dangerous in our system. So when they start showing up in a school setting, they get flagged. And there's a pretty strong pressure to medicate. It really is strong, especially if you can't. They go to a healer or something, and the healer's kind of wishy-washy, and they can't really make sure the kid's different. The parents give it about 2 seconds. They say, look, that was a waste of time. Let's get them on the stuff because there's studies, it's science, it's covered. These doctors are smart people. They're not going to do anything to hurt our kids. And that's the state of play right now. The momentum is really about pharmaceutical intervention.
It's very interesting. I was just thinking if we're at the 40% threshold, we really should be thinking of how can we make this better for the kids at school, even if they have to open up another
Yes.
room or
Yeah.
teachers that specialize in that.
Remember, Mark, we went over this too, and for everybody, not just kids, but let's just start with kids because they're precious. Exercise. That's if you had to pick one thing that was cheapest, and that's the very stuff that they are taking out. Yes, if you have means, you can do extracurricular. You can get a hockey league or something, or soccer, or even lacrosse. But in school, they need to get up and move around and do stuff. Uh, every 20 minutes, kids cannot stop and just burn through hours of information without losing it. And so I would say that's the cheapest hack. The next thing would be, and we talked about this one too, sleep. And that is on the parents. They got to yank the screens out of the kids' hands and get them to go to bed. Kids need about 10 hours of sleep until they're about 27. Their brain's still developing. So sleep is really um, huge benefit for the effort. And nutrition is key. We can go into that if you want, but parents try. Kids want to eat sugar. It's a non-ending battle. Even if you pack their lunches, they'll take their other kids. Like I hand pack the kids' lunch, and they end up swapping it for a Lunchable with, you know, synthetic cheese and whatever. And you do what you can, but you owe it to the kids if you have any ability at all to give them nutrition. And we can talk about some key things like that, but that's the easiest, most lowest bar. The next level up would be something like music programs, music and art. Whew, well, that's pretty crazy stuff, right? Art in school or music in school. Now, public schools used to have those things, right? They used to have a band, they used to have a art teacher. That's all kind of patchy. The one teacher goes around all the schools or whatever. Up here, whole Redmond school district didn't have any art at all for any of the elementary school. And the local Dry Canyon Art Association raised $60,000 just to pay for some artists to go around to the elementary schools and teach art, which is awesome. But priorities. So art, movement, art, however you do it, because those kids in that class need to be visual or tactile or whatever. And, it costs a few bucks to get some pencils and stuff and some clay. But the next thing would be music, super important. And we're all enriched by that. Every kid, you don't have to rent a viola, but I don't know, drums, triangle, whatever, bells, um, getting rhythm into kids that feel it. Some kids do not listen to people talking. They have to feel it through their bones, tactile people. There's other types of learning styles too. So that would be helpful. Reviewing, and there's endless books and papers about different learning styles. You can go online and figure out what your learning style is. And having that as an option, woven that into the curriculum. And then I would say pet therapy. This is fun, but the more animals in people's lives, the more they have empathy and the more they can self-stimulate themselves so that they're kind of filling in those gaps with the neurotransmitters. So um, I love the programs that have ag, future farmer and that kind of stuff, which is not always available. But yeah, you can do like indoor gardens and you can do biology. And that's how I got to love biology is being exposed to it in the school. But pets are good for kids. Pets are good for ADHD kids. Pets are really good for autistic kids. Pets are good for kids who have anxiety. Pets are good for kids who are lonely, and gives them responsibility, let them know about the life and death cycle. They have to be accountable. So pet ownership is super important, as well as just being around animals and touching them and stuff like that. And it gives you empathy. Otherwise, you can be cruel. If you aren't taught to be kind to other things, you just can be, especially if an ADHD kid can just be allowed to be random around something and hurt things. So the next step is just enrichment programs, which involves money and that kind of thing. But I would say getting the things back into the school that we used to feel was the best part of school. And you know, people want to pay money for their kids. I don't know why they don't want to pay for public schools, but maybe they think that the wrong ethics or morals are being taught by public school teachers. I don't know about that. They just are hanging on by their skin of their teeth. So I'm a pro public school person. I did like Montessori and Waldorf and all those alternative styles because they brought in all these same things that we're talking about. But again, they're very exclusive and expensive. And it's a shame that you have to have money to have a good education.
But it's like really. I mean, if you think it like playing, guitar class or stuff like that, I don't understand what's so expensive about that. I mean, honestly, there's so many different ways to make things affordable, especially these days. I mean, growing up in school, we had art, we had pottery. I mean, come
Yeah,
on. I
yeah.
mean, nowadays they have. I'm seeing a shift is that they're taking away so much from the schools now that the kids are going out finding sports on their own to do. Like I played pickleball, right, as an adult. And I love the fact that when I go play pickleball, I see nothing but young kids playing, hanging out with their friends. It's a little irritating because sometimes I can't get a court. But my point is, I'm glad they're out there doing that than vandalizing and doing stuff like that. So what I'm saying is they're going to find it no matter what, because meaning they're going to find something. So they shouldn't be taking anything away. I think what happens is when you've got so much government involved and not letting the people like you and I that have the kids have more of a voice and we're being listened to. And this is what should be happening.
So we did a recent talk, that we did one up here, and some of the people in the audience were parents that had a child who was just diagnosed like this and medicated, and some of the people were educators that they were dealing with kids like this in their classroom, and one of the persons at least was a prescriber would be giving Adderall and different
All right.
methylphenate, Ritalin, and felt like, well, those parents were thankful because that kid was out of control. Now he's lining up. And we had case histories on this presentation where the combination of things, not just me being fabulous, but me being reminding them to go to other doctors that help them with like notes back to the cafeteria lady so they could have special food because they're allergic to the thing. They had to have the local hospital system draw their blood for different things. So, we had uh, food allergy testing, we had these genetic testing, homeopathics, different herbal things, and then they had to do still stuff at home. So the kid had to learn. Several of these kids here had to learn stuff at home. They were going through the same old thing, the regular mom and kid struggle or dad and kid struggle as they go through developmental stages. So it's not just about neurotransmitters, it's tough being a kid. It's tough being a kid in 2026. It's tough being parents in 2026. There's a lot of nano pressure that's coming in through the internet. And it's just a hum of demand that was not around 100 years ago. So there's an angst to our nervous. Who knows what 5G is doing? I mean, we're just surrounded at all times by these magnetic waves. And it's a lot. So kids feel anxious. They often feel like they're the only ones going through this kind of stuff. They may or may not be able to talk to their friends. They may text their friends instead of talking to their friends. They certainly may not feel like the adults are listening, what generation did. So I'm because I see this in my practice, Mark, I wanted to address it because as the title said, what you don't know about ADHD, what most parents don't know is they're not alone and there's some great new testing and then there's some great new intervention stuff that is not toxic. And they also need to know their kids are going to be okay. They're going to be probably running the joint.
I like what I love. I like what you're saying, Dr. Collins, and I also like what you said. It's not. This doesn't have to be painful. You have a way where they can just get a cotton swab, put it in the mouth,
Yeah.
and let's talk about that. Since you do that, and if anyone is out there that is wanting to get more information, they can call
Yeah, yeah.
the
So
number
if
on the
in my
screen.
office, we can tell you where to go to, or I mean, we can basically lab tests. Any licensed person, doctor type person can get that for you if they want to. Problem is, it may not be covered unless you got the right number. If you have a number that's a diagnosis code and your particular insurance pays for that particular treatment for that diagnosis code, then you're in. But you got to get the right doctor to give you the right number, to give you the right medicine or the right laboratory requisition. So I can do a requisition for anybody for anything, but they may have to pay cash for it. If you have your insurance doctor want that same test, they can do that for you. They just have to kind of rearrange the numbers so that that number matches that test. And these tests are fairly new. So they are, let's say $350 for a range, not $1,000, but also not $50. And one of the things that's kind of hitting the internet is that people are going around their doctor, they're paying cash, but they're getting these home test kits. Nothing wrong with that. They're not waiting for the doctors to catch up with them, and there's nothing dangerous with that. Having that diagnosis of yourself. It could save 20 years off your life, because there's ways to mitigate some of these accumulated biochemical waste products that even involve cancer and heart disease too. So um, there's a number of different labs that do these blood tests and or cheek swabs, and professionals can find them, or you can get from our office. We can find it for you. And then whether or not you use me or whoever, at least you have that information. And you can go back to your pediatrician and go back to da da da, or go back to the Waldorf school or whatever.
Let's talk about that though, real quick. One thing I will say, everyone out there, I like what Dr. Collins said. It could be me, it could be somebody else, but just for me hearing Dr. Collins, if you kind of go with your insurance company, not saying that that's not a bad thing, but a lot of the time there's a lot of work that they just want to kind of get the bare minimum from what I've seen over the
Right. Well,
years.
let's say you're an adult and you have Kaiser insurance, something like that, right? HMO type insurance, and you're not Medicare. Medicare is not going to cover this, by the way. So if you are a Medicare person, you want your Medicare to cover it, doesn't matter how sweet talking the doctor does to the Medicare, they're not going to pay for that diagnosis code having to do with that lab test. Maybe, but they tend to not do that, not push the envelope too much. If you're living wage type working years, 30 to 50, often you have insurance and you've negotiated with your plan, health maintenance organization, everything's vertically integrated, and they save money by saying no to tests. So no to tests unless really squeezed, and the person who is doing the squeezing is your primary care doctor in that system, whose job is not to run tests, but it's to refer. So if you are at the spoke of the wheel, center of the wheel, and your spokes are the referral specialists, you end up at a psychiatrist or a neurologist or a pediatric neurologist, pediatric psychiatrist, or wherever. And those people are even more intransigent to think outside of the box, unfortunately. And that's kind of what you get if you listen to the experts from these universities, is they are not talking about the genetic testing. They're talking about early diagnosis and the same old drugs to treat the newly developed ICD-10 codes. And this is the problem. You go in thinking you're getting a first or second or third opinion, but because it's a system that is covered by insurance, you're only going to get the options that they have been doing, since yesterday and the day before and the day before. And if you say, what about this? I found out about it on the internet. They'll say, ha, Dr. Google. Well, that's dangerous. But the truth is, it's how people find out about stuff now. And everyone's got AI too. So you can get pretty sophisticated pretty quickly and still need some help. So it's not like one doctor is going to be the doctor for the rest of your family's history for that child or for you. You're going to have a bunch of different people that work through your life about this issue or these issues. And the more information, the quicker, the better, as in my opinion. So I love people that get on the Googleometer and learn stuff. It's never going to be to their detriment unless, you know, whatever. You just have to have common sense. But if the people want to get information, they can call my office. I can chat it up with them. And again, this is one of those things where I'm doing this mostly because I've had a lot. I think we shared again. a lot of mental illness in my family. I've been around a lot of schizophrenic people, been around a lot of autistic people, been around a lot of bipolar people, been around people who are mood disorders, depression, crushing depression. There's a lot of pain out there. And being a creative person myself, we have special gifts to give to the community and the world at large. And that's the take-home message of the talk is that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And there's always been people like this. There might be more now. It's a debate why there's so many people popping up like this. I think they're going to help with the world that's going to be transitioning. And we need them. We need them. We need them. So let's not over drug them and get them all bland and flat affect. We want a little bit of interesting people and artists and creative types and the new innovators. The persons that want to go to Mars.
We don't need to take away their superpower, because hey, it's about harnessing things and making sure that no one's getting hurt and themselves. But here's the thing, guys. I just want to let you guys know that when you guys call Dr. Drew, we know the old saying, the old adjective is knowledge is power. If you were to put Dr. Collins up against another doctor that's going to talk to you about this, I can almost guarantee you're going to get all the information you need for this from Dr. Collins. A lot of these other doctors will get you on the phone. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it like it is. This is on me. A lot of them will get you on the phone and they'll just say a few things. Just hurry up and get you the little pill or get you something real fast, and let's just move forward. From what I've learned from Dr. Collins, he's very detailed. He will ask you the right questions. He will dig. And a lot of doctors don't do that these days. And I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I have kids. I've got grandkids. I've been a kid, and
I hope
it's
so.
not. I was a kid once, and no one makes these choices easily. So good old compassionate listening is a good skill to have. And people have these crazy stories. They might have just not one, but two kids are at ADHD, or one kid that's autistic spectrum and an ADHD, and someone who's depressed. Not to mention the husband or the wife, or um, just giving everybody a stimulant doesn't fix that dynamic. They're in for a roller coaster, and they're going to need help with elders or professionals or lady across the fence, who's got an idea about ginger poultice or something. But right now and for now, there is an explosion of diagnoses, and there's a juggernaut of medicating kids that I think is ill-advised because it's not holistic, and it misses the point of what these children are bringing to our society. And it makes them wrong instead of just being different or something to be noticed and accommodated. So the pathological description of these behaviors are somewhat connected to a genetic predisposition, but also we're going to have to deal with people who are different than us forever.
Right.
Right? We're going to always have to put up with the weirdo in the classroom around the fire, or as I say, the shaman in the hut down at the end of the village is crazy, and you don't want to go down there because the guy will kill you, or at least ego death. And the next shaman is the weird kid that no one else would deal with, and they go and throw him down there at the shaman's house, and then he became the apprentice. And that's kind of what they did for thousands of years, is the seers or the mediums are the ones that were never fit in. They had a place for them. It's called, 101 level shaman training. And, that's where they went. But now everyone's got to be accountable and kind of go through the same milestones of academics. And these kids will not be buttonholed into being normal. And there's
Wow.
more and more of them all the time. we're not even talking about the whole starseed concept and the whole idea that these kids are being born for a reason and they don't want to talk about anything that's old guard or old institutions or not true. They want to focus on they want to talk about the planet, or they want to talk about intentional communities, and they're coming up with 0 point energy, and they're 12 years old at the science fair. They're like, where's this guy coming from? He's, wireless electricity. He's coming up with it, and he's 12. That's the kind of thing you don't want to miss because the kid's awkward or weird or blinks when they talk or stutters, God forbid, or dresses funny. I think about all the different people that got bullied, growing up, and just, my memory, and those people are engineers now, or, artists, or they may not have made it. They may have had this accumulation of these homocysteine and these different things from their methyl methylation dysfunction, which is a thing, and they die early. So, or crushing depression, they take their own life. So identification, testing, it's available now. Put a big hug around everybody, tell them you're doing okay, be a little more tolerant, because someone wiped your butt when you were little and you got to stop acting like, you got it figured out. And as we get older, we start needing compassion too. That's another
Yeah.
sadness, is that just when you thought you had it figured out, all of a sudden you're um, discountable and no longer in the game. And then it really takes compassion for somebody to not be behind you in the car and honk because you waited for 5 seconds to start into the intersection. So the old person that you used to yell at, who they were being so slow fumbling with their checkbook or something in the checkout, now that's you.
Yeah. I feel like that on the
Maybe not
pickleball
you,
court.
but that's me. So
I feel like that on the pickleball court with my son sometimes. It was funny. He was like, Dad, you're really good, but your hands aren't as fast. And I'm like,
what do you want? Yeah. Yeah. What do you want from
I'm
me?
like, all right, buddy. Okay. Okay. But
That's yeah.
it's funny when I don't want to move, he goes, come on, old man. I go, and then I give him that
Cheap
look like, I'll
cheap
show you,
shots.
old man. Yeah.
Yeah, cheap
I'm like, I'll
shots.
show you,
Yeah.
old man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they
But
say the worst day in the life of a man and the best day is when he beats his father. So it's the best day in a young man's life when he beats his father, but it's also the death of a certain icon in his life because he's just a man now.
dude, I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, oh boy. But
Yeah.
thank you so much, Dr. Drew Collins. You can find Dr. Drew at proactivechoice.com. Proactivechoice.com. Remember, just because you have ADHD, it doesn't make you weird. Okay. You guys got to all know that, and those that are listening to this,
Yes.
we've all had it. I mean, I
We
know when I
need
was a
you.
kid, when I
We
was a
need
kid, they're
you.
all, he has ADHD. We'll put him in this room. It doesn't
Yeah.
work that way. And
Yeah.
sometimes people, they do that. But here's the thing. You don't just ignore it. There is a way to harness and to help people become better than who they are. And that's what this is about, making them better at who they are, because this is the way God created you. This is the way you were born. And you shouldn't be dismissed. And people out there shouldn't be dismissing people. We need to be more kind, more friendly. We need to realize that when it says to love thy neighbor, whether you believe in it or not, guys, it says love thy neighbor. That means people around you. Treat them as if that's your father, your brother. We'll see the world be a better place. And what I love about Dr. Drew, he's about helping people, and that's his heart, that's his passion. And there's very few people like that. And I don't need to just say that, it's the truth. Anyways, thank you so much, Doctor, and look forward to continue doing this. This is getting fun.
Okay. Be well, guys.
All right, awesome stuff.